I Saw Dogman from the Empty Chapel. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This story did not actually happen to me. It happened to my father. However, he told it so many times that I think I have the facts straight, other than the actual year this happened. This is the 3rd anniversary of Dad's passing, and my brother and I both worked together to try to recreate the story, which happened when we were very young. Dad didn't tell us any of this until we were adults because he didn't want to scare us. We didn't live all that far from the location of this Dogman experience, and he said it wouldn't have been fair to us as kids to rob us of our childhood. My father felt that it was healthy for us to play in the woods, and if we had known there was a creature like this lurking through our home state of Pennsylvania, I'm not sure we would have spent 1 second out of doors that we didn't absolutely need to. So I may not know exactly when this took place, but I can tell you exactly where it did. It was at that Calvary Chapel over in Stroudsburg. This was when the place was first built, but before it was set to open. My father was one of the architects working on the project, although he was not the main guy. He said the building was getting close to being ready to open, and that he was there alone one Sunday morning, going over some stuff for his boss. Don't ask me, but it was something that needed to happen before Monday, so my dad was in there on Sunday. It seemed ironic to him at the time because that was when the building would be most active once it was open to the public. On that morning, though, the sky was overcast, and off in the distance he could see lightning slowly coming closer. Instead of your usual cricket sound effect, you should probably play rolling thunder in the background of this story, because that's what my dad was hearing when this all happened. He had hoped to be finished with his business and home before the downpour hit, but that was seeming increasingly unlikely. Now, I don't know if you've ever been to that particular church, but I have. I had a friend who went there when I was younger, and I sometimes went as a guest to youth events that they had. We'd play games and have lunch or whatever. I never actually attended any services there. Inside, it's like some other Protestant church buildings I've been in, but outside to me it looks more like a Walmart or a Petco than a place of worship. I think it still looks modern even today, so it's 100% the opposite of what a spooky old church is supposed to look like. Also, it's not exactly in the middle of nowhere. There are houses across the street in one direction, and it's next to the post office in the other direction. But when you're there in the dark, it can somehow really give off a spooky vibe. I think it's the trees that surround it. Even though there are only 1 or 2 trees thick in places, you still get a vibe of being out in the country. You still feel that God and nature rule here. Somehow the place makes me feel small and reminds me of my tiny place in the vastness of everything. Maybe that's a coincidental result of the location, or maybe that's part of the reason that spot naturally developed into a place of worship. That's all over my head and not for me to decide, but I do think the interesting vibe of the place is worth mentioning. It's both easily accessible in a nice neighborhood, and yet simultaneously feels like you're out in the middle of nowhere. When you wander the dirt path to the modern department store-looking church, it still somehow feels like you might be walking through fields in the 1800s, or even further back in time. I'm not sure if the magic feel of it comes across in photos. I thought it was worth mentioning, because so many Dogman stories feature mentions of the frightening vibration around the creature. People sometimes wonder aloud in their accounts about whether the fear they felt was natural or something else. That's kind of how I felt about the strange way I felt when I was in or around the building that my dad's sighting took place in. So let's get back to my dad's story. He was finishing up his work on that day, but needed to finish a few more chores. He walked to the back of the building to look outside and see what the weather was doing. He saw the very creature that my brother and I wonder so much about. What he saw was a big wolf, or a wolf-like dog, walking around on its hind legs at the edge of the woods. He saw it, He knew that he saw it, and yet he couldn't believe that he saw it. Dad rubbed his eyes and looked again, but it was walking in and out of shadow, and Dad still couldn't accept what he seemed to be seeing. Since he could only view part of the creature at any one given moment, he was hoping against hope that it would walk out of the tree cover into the somewhat brighter day so that he could understand what that was. It couldn't be what he thought he was seeing because he thought he was seeing a werewolf. Everybody knows that werewolves only exist in the movies, so Dad wanted to be shown that he was wrong. He wanted a bear or a deer to walk out of those woods. He wanted to have a laugh at how his eyes had fooled him. The trouble was, every time he got another glimpse of whatever that was, it looked more and more like a huge wolf, standing upright and walking around, looking down at the ground for some reason. Unable to get a better view, and with the thunder getting louder each time it struck, Dad reluctantly gave up waiting for the creature to reveal itself, and went back to his work. After finally finishing what he had come there to do, Dad once again returned to the back where his car was parked, and looked outside. At first he thought the coast was clear, but then he noticed movement in the brush out there. Feeling an intense sense of fear, with his heart beating hard in his chest, Dad watched in horror as the bushes and leaves parted, and out ran a fur-covered, feral, sharp-clawed little bunny rabbit. The rabbit ran into the meadow, and my father laughed at himself for taking this all so seriously. He had almost peed himself. He had worked himself up so badly, and all the time it had all been in his head. Well, except it hadn't been. Out of those same bushes, parting them almost less than the smaller creature had, a huge, feral wolf silently glided out into the meadow and dispatched the bunny before it had any idea it might be in danger. The wolf he had thought he was seeing, the oversized wolf he had been trying to convince himself was not really there, the werewolf-type creature that couldn't possibly be real, it was standing there, on all fours, and making quick work out of that expired little rabbit. It wasn't standing on its hind legs. It was down on all fours. It looked like a giant wolf now. It did not look humanoid in any way, but when the lightning flashed down, fully illuminating the creature in the increasingly heavy rain, Dad could see it was definitely the same one he had been seeing walking around like a man earlier. My father was a lot more religious than my brother and I are, so he interpreted what he was seeing as some kind of demonic presence. Maybe it was because he was in a building that was soon to be used as a church. Possibly that's what moved his mind in that direction, but that was how he told us the story. Dad thought that a demonic presence was stalking around that area, angry that this plot of land was going to be used to serve God from then on. Dad seemed to intuitively feel that this demonic canine presence felt this land was being taken from his evil and turned over to goodness, from savagery to civilization. And the evil savage was not very happy about any of this. So the immense canine was having its meal in a place that was not really very far from where my father had parked his car. It might not be the best time to go out there, he thought, but at the same time, that beast might be where it was for another hour, doing, what it was doing. Reasoning that he should make a break for the car while the monster was preoccupied, Dad did just that. He went out one of the back doors of the church, locking it behind him, and ran for his car. He probably should not have run, since the clatter and the movement attracted the attention of the beast man, and it stood up on its hind legs to get a better look at Dad running to his car. Dad told us that when the dogman stood up and looked at him, standing there on two legs just like he thought he had seen it do in the woods earlier, Something froze up inside of my father. He no longer could pretend that it was a trick of light or his imagination that had caused the dog to appear like an upright walking werewolf. He could now see it pretty clearly, even on a day as gloomy as that one. Fear overtook my father, and instead of finishing his run to the car, he, for some reason he could never explain, even to himself, foolishly turned around and ran back to the door he had come out of, which was now locked. Fumbling for his keys, Dad looked back to see the dogman trotting over on his hind legs. That was the word Dad used, trotting. He said the dogman looked like an outfielder trotting back to the dugout when the inning was over, and my dad was the dugout he was trotting toward. Dad said he probably dropped his keys more times in that moment than he did for the entire rest of his life. The creature man, who seemed in no rush, got closer and closer as Dad failed time and time again to get the key into the lock. Well, you already know that he lived to tell us this tale, so you can probably figure out that he did indeed get inside. But now he had the attention of the dogman, and he was trapped in there. Dad said his mind was racing. This was not a problem he had ever faced before, and not a problem he had ever prepared for either. This was work-related. Should he call his boss or one of his coworkers and tell them what was going on? They would laugh at him. They might even fire him. He couldn't tell them he was trapped by a werewolf. What if he called his wife? What could she do? Come out and rescue him in her car? She'd only be placing herself in danger as well. Then he remembered his buddy Val, who was a retired police officer. Val was afraid of nothing. He could call Val to come out and rescue him in the lightning storm. Dad ran to a phone and then remembered as he was picking up the receiver that the phone line had not yet been put in. He knew that all along, but in his panic, he had forgotten. Since those were the days before cell phones, Dad was really trapped in there. He couldn't even call the cops or the fire department. Dad did have a fancy car phone paid for by his employer, which was an expensive luxury in those days, but the dogman was in between him and his car, so that phone was doing him no good at all. Dad decided he might be able to make a run for his car if he could get the dogman around on the other side of the building. In order to do that, he'd have to let the dogman see him walking around inside the building to the front side and hope that it followed him. Then, when they were both around the front, Dad would have to sneak back, staying away from the windows and hoping the dogman didn't figure out what he was doing. So Dad put his plan into action, catching the dogman's attention through the window, then beginning his slow movement toward the front of the building. There aren't that many windows clear enough to see through, but he somehow managed to cause the dogman to march all the way around to the other side of the place. Then Dad sunk down in what he hoped was the dark and crawled his way to the back of the building where his car was parked. On his hands and knees, he listened for any sound of the dogman, but all he heard was rain and some very loud thunder. Feeling more and more hopeful, but with his heart only beating harder in each passing second, Dad got up and ran to the back door. He was about to fling it open and run to his car, but at the very last second, something held him back. What if the dogman had beaten him around the building? It wasn't as though it were a slow animal. It could clearly move on its hind legs, as well as on all fours. There was very little chance it could be slower than he was. He argued with himself in his mind. Part of him was certain the dogman had been confused, and that it was time to make a run for the car. The other half of him wanted to take a look out there first, before going outside. Look before you leap and all that. Well, that's the side that won in his internal argument, and so Dad walked over to the nearest window, and he looked outside. Lightning struck as the Dogman looked right back inside at him. That did something to my father, he admitted to us. It felt like he got tasered or something. I remember him saying that seeing the Dogman looking right back in at him felt as bad as sticking his finger in a live electric socket. He lost all his manliness, and my dad was a manly man. This time, though, Dad found a closet, and he ran into it. He was convinced the Dogman was going to break through the glass and come inside and eat him for lunch. So, my dad cowered like a little baby and made himself ridiculous and set a terrible example for me and my brother. That's not how I feel, that's the way he would tell the story. He was very embarrassed that he got that scared. He literally hid in a closet, to his eternal shame. Well, Dad never heard that glass breaking, and eventually he fell asleep in the closet. When he woke up, it was dark out, and the rain had stopped. The Dogman seemed to have gotten bored of waiting for him, and the coast looked clear. Breathing a sigh of relief, Dad went outside, happy to be breathing the night air after the rainstorm. Everything that had seemed so horrible now seemed pleasant, and the world had been put back in order again. Then, as Dad was putting his key into the lock to open his car door, a loud staccato barking erupted from the woods where the Dogman had been devouring its kill earlier. The werewolf creature was there, and it had just noticed that Dad had come outside. Dad said all he had to do was turn the key and get in the car, but it felt as though all his blood lost its heat, and he shivered all over. His fingers felt numb and hard to move properly. It took all his concentration to turn that key and to pull on that door, which seemed as heavy as the door to a bank safe. Dad wanted to look behind him to see if the Dogman was approaching, but he knew he couldn't risk it. One look in the eyes of that thing would freeze him completely, like a mouse mesmerized by a snake. Dad kept focusing on what he needed to do. Lift one leg into the car. Lift the other one in. Close the door. Lock the door. He was making great progress step by step and was about to put the key in the ignition when the Dogman slammed hard into the driver's seat window, and my dad screamed the scream of a man who knows he's about to leave this world in a painful way. Dad told us he was not proud of his reaction, and he felt he was a coward in that instant. I remember him breaking out into tears and saying that if our mother were there with him at that time, she might have gotten swallowed up whole by that monster dog. He always believed that he would do anything to protect her, but the Dogman made my dad doubt himself and his own ability to protect his family from harm. The Dogman made my father doubt his own manhood. Dad said that he moved his cowardly butt to the center of the front seat, almost sitting on the gear shift sort of, when he realized his car had a special magic ability. His car could roll back and forth on wheels. He would say that in a way to make fun of himself, because in that moment he felt like a newborn babe learning how the world works for the very first time. For my father in that moment, it was like a divine revelation to realize that he had the power to attempt an escape before the Dogman broke into the car and tore him to shreds, as it seemed intent on doing. Dad said the rest of it was the most surreal part of all, in a half-dazed state where every single movement he made had to be consciously focused on. Dad robotically started the engine, mechanically shifted into reverse, pulled out of the spot in a sluggish fashion, the Dogman barking and growling and banging on the exterior of his vehicle. Dad said he didn't know if he was going to get away first, or if the Dogman was going to smash one of the windows and get inside instead. He forced himself to continue to focus purely on the next thing he needed to do, and to block out the increasingly emotional giant dog going absolutely savage outside his car. Dad said he drove down the road to get away from the scene, and when the dogman chased him out onto that road, he laughed out loud. But it wasn't the healthy kind of laughter. It was more like nervous laughter, like crazy laughter. Like that movie The Joker. It was more an expression of what was wrong about the situation than what was right. Dad was on the verge of flipping out. He remembered the car phone and took a look at the big blocky thing. He tried to remember how to use it and began to feel nauseous. Dad had to keep looking out the window and driving. Complicated things like phone calls were going to have to wait. Dad found himself accelerating and seeing the dogman drop to all fours in his rear-view mirror and accelerate just as much. Dad was laughing harder and harder as he found he could not shake the big dog. When another car drove out onto the road heading toward him, Dad thought about beeping and calling the guy's attention to the dogman. However, when he looked in his mirrors, that dogman was no longer there. He must have run into the woods when Dad wasn't looking or something, but in that moment, Dad was more than a little paranoid. Not seeing the dogman made him more frightened than seeing him, since when he saw him, at least Dad knew where he was. Now he had no idea where the creature was or where it might leap out at him from. Dad sped away from there and went home to get over his bad experience. I asked him how much work he missed, and he told me that missing work was never an option back then. He just went home, got drunk, and slept it off. He had to be back to work the next day at that same location, and he felt he had to act as though nothing had ever happened. Well, in all those years since then, I've never heard of anyone else seeing a dogman by that church. I think it was a random encounter and may possibly have had something to do with the lightning storm. Weather disturbances seem to me like they may have something to do with doorways opening between parallel realities. If the dogman is real, why don't we have any in zoos? I think Dogman is a visitor from another reality. He's real there, but he's a walking nightmare here, pulling even brave men like my father down into the pits of pathetic fear. Since I'm not a religious man, I don't know what a demon would actually be, but maybe that's what it is. Maybe a demon is a creature from a reality that isn't supposed to cross over into ours. And if not, then why did my father insist to me and my brother that I saw a dogman from the empty chapel? We hope you liked that all-new Dogman story, but don't go away. We've got 3 more for you, starting with this next tale that's known as My Old Bulldog Was a Cryptid Magnet. Dear Scary Stories, NYC. When my eccentric aunt left me her bulldog in her will, I had no idea how much taking him into our home would change my life and that of my girlfriend as well. And I have to ask myself, if I knew in advance that taking in this cute little dog would lead to multiple encounters with terrifying cryptids like the Dogman, would I have still taken him into my home? In my family, the most flamboyant and interesting character ever was my great-aunt Sylvia. We would go to visit her haunted mansion out in New Jersey somewhere when I was a kid. I think we visited 4 times, but I have 6 or 7 distinct memories of the place and of Aunt Sylvia. I remember that she had dolls which acted as though they were alive for the first time I slept over. They said rude things to me and kept me up half the night. The next time we stayed over, I was given a different room to sleep in, and I woke up in the middle of the night to a really old-looking lady standing at the end of my bed. I remember that she looked startled when I screamed, and she told me something like, "Don't worry, I can't see you," before blinking out like a light that someone just turned off. The final time I was out there with my parents, I must have been 15, and Aunt Sylvia regaled me with stories of the strange creatures of time and space which she had known and dealt with during her long lifetime. She claimed to know famous people like old school ghost hunter Hans Holzer personally, and even told me that he once visited that very home and pronounced it haunted. She also told me some very interesting cryptid stories. In retrospect, it sounds to me like her property had multiple habituations from large cryptids. Great Aunt Sylvia was far less comfortable talking about cryptids than she was about ghosts. She had been involved in spiritualism and seances and all that sort of thing when she was young and lived in various large cities. Even after she moved out to her strange haunted house in a nicer and more rural area of the suburbs, she never saw any strange animals or entities other than spiritual ones. She even had this story about the day she brought her dog Sparky home, the Bulldog that I later inherited. Aunt Sylvia said that a werewolf saw them driving by the night she brought the little dog out to her house for the first time. According to the way she would tell it, the werewolf looked at her, and Aunt Sylvia looked back at the werewolf. Then, as she drove by, the upright walking wolf turned his attention to the little yappy bulldog leaning out the window and barking its head off. The werewolf seemed to take offense at Sparky, and he pursued Aunt Sylvia most of the rest of the way home. Ever since that day, all manner of strange things started happening on top of the ordinary paranormal events that have always happened in and around that house. Whereas before, Aunt Sylvia would find her personal items in strange places and see objects fly off of shelves, now she was also seeing shadowy silhouettes of huge men walking outside her house at night. Aunt Sylvia could talk endlessly about the assorted things she witnessed and experienced, both at that home and elsewhere. But when she spoke of the cryptids in that part of her rural area, she would sort of tremble all over, and her voice would get quavery as well. The ghostly stuff didn't really scare her. It just interested her. She had invited that into her life. But the monsters and the dog-headed men and so forth, they were uninvited guests, and Sylvia clearly lacked the knowledge or courage to know how to ask them to leave. Sylvia blamed that first werewolf or dogman who followed her and Sparky the Bulldog home for most of the rest of what followed. When Bigfoot would dart in front of her car as she drove along deserted highways at night, Aunt Sylvia would say, "That's the dogman's fault." When she would be confronted with the tiny men who tried to trip her when she walked outside at night, Aunt Sylvia would say, "That's the dogman's fault too." When she heard those strange disembodied voices whispering from the nearby woods at night, Aunt Sylvia felt that was the dogman's fault as well. She seemed to believe that he ruined the neighborhood once he got there, and that all sorts of riffraff had moved in afterward. Aunt Sylvia enjoyed her life less and less during those last few years, and she always blamed the dogman for all of it. I had a notion that I never passed on to her, because it seemed too mean to repeat. It seemed clear to me that the dogman only came into her life because of the bulldog. She was certain that she had never seen a cryptid of any sort, but once Sparky the Bulldog was in her life, the dogman started tracking her car. Once she got home, she started seeing all manner of cryptids, including a large, reddish Sasquatch hiding just out of sight, staring at her or her house. Always staring, always watching. What was he watching for? I think he was watching for the Bulldog, but Aunt Sylvia, she loved that dog, so I didn't have the heart to tell her. I thought she should give the dog away, but I never told her how I felt. And when she passed on, as you already know, she left Sparky the Bulldog to me. I know what you're thinking. If I knew the dog was a cryptid magnet, and I didn't want to be around cryptids, why did I take the dog in? Why not give it away, as I had thought my great aunt should have done in the first place? Well, I thought the dog was haunted when I was 15. By the time I inherited the dog, I was 23. I was mature. I was an adult. I hadn't seen Aunt Sylvia in 8 years, and I had a job and a live-in girlfriend. Sparky was a sweet, cuddly old dog by that point, and my girlfriend fell in love with him at first sight, so why not take him in? Back then, we were living in a tiny private home near the Hellertown Reservoirs in PA, a home that doesn't actually exist any longer. The last time I spoke with that ex-girlfriend about it, she said the place got torn down because we cursed it by bringing little Sparky the Bulldog in to live there. Sparky himself was the sweetest dog you could ever meet, but when he was around, horrible, nightmarish monsters seemed to like to drop by. And the most unnerving of all, of course, would always be the upright walking Dogman. The first time my girlfriend, we can call Jana, saw the Dogman was the beginning of the end of our relationship. She was walking Sparky one night because I had forgotten to do it. According to Jana, that makes the rest of what I'm about to tell you all my fault. So here's what went down that night. She and the little Bulldog walked down the path that led to the little 2-lane highway in the woods near us. Now, when I walked Sparky, I never had to walk that far because he was a tiny dog, and there was only so much he could go in each trip. If this had happened back on our property, then fine, I could be partially blamed. But Jana decided to keep walking after Sparky must have finished doing his business. Walking through any woods at night is a bit iffy, so you don't want to wander alone out there any more than you need to, you know? I think this makes everything her fault, not mine. I'm absolved from blame for this. So what am I absolved from blame for? Well, okay, so Jana and the little Bulldog walked down to the 2-lane highway and out of the woods. On the other side of the highway burst this huge man covered in gray fur with a dog head. She said it was like Dave Winfield wearing a werewolf costume. I guess that pretty much dates this story. Dave Winfield was a very tall outfielder in Major League Baseball in the 20th century. BaseballReference.com says that when he played, he was 6'6" and 220 pounds. I suppose it might be a little intimidating to see a man 6.5 feet tall charging at you and your little dog while he's wearing a dog-headed wolfman costume. Jana and Sparky flipped out in fear. They turned around and ran back up the road to our house the way they came. And it's a good thing they did, too, because the big Dave Winfield Dogman almost had a head-on collision with a car speeding down the highway. According to the way Jana told me, the car swerved off the highway and ran right over where she and the dog had been only a few seconds earlier. She had come within a few feet of being crushed, and as you can imagine, she was a changed person after that. Jana picked up the dog and ran home, convinced that the Dogman was trailing her, even though she didn't see him or hear him. From then on, she became paranoid that the Dogman was there, always there. Her mother took her home to stay with her for a while, which ended our relationship. Jana became convinced that it was Sparky the dog who was the cause of her having to endure that Dogman experience. It was part of why we all thought she was insane at the time. I felt deep pity for her, and everyone blamed me, even my own family. They said I drove her insane, drove my own girlfriend over the brink. I could give you stories of what happened in the 3 years after that, when I lived alone with Sparky. He and I had some interesting experiences, believe you me, but I am all out of Dogman stories now, so I expect this is more or less where I should drag it to a halt. I do want to say that after Sparky the Bulldog passed on, that was the end of me seeing Dogman or Bigfoot or Puckwudgies or Gremlins or Trolls or any of the weird cryptids that seemed to be habituated near where I lived during his lifetime. Did they just move out after he left us? Were they still there, only I became unable to perceive them without Sparky? Or maybe, could it just be the plain hard cold fact that my old Bulldog was a cryptid magnet? She's as strong as she can be, our executive producer, Chris C. She's so brave my eyes get misty every time I think of Christy. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, Chris C., for making this episode possible. Chris has supported us for a long time, and we try to be supportive back to her. One of the good people, we appreciate her and are very happy that she's around. Chris receives cool perks in return for her membership. International TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman will be along at the very end of the show to bring you all the deets of how you too can get cool perks while helping our channel stay online. But now let's jump into our next story, which is called My Parents Don't Know That Dogman is My Friend. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I'm lucky enough to have two really good parents. They tried to raise me to be a good person like them, and it's clear they care a lot about me. I know people who have no parents, and others who have bad parents, so I'm very aware how lucky I am. That's why it pains me to keep such a large secret from the two people who brought me into this world. And believe me, my secret is Dogman-sized. I've been friends with a North American upright walking canine or canid since I was 16 years old and broke up with my 18-year-old girlfriend. My mother used to call her the older woman. I don't think my father disliked her, but my mother made it clear that she did. Mom disliked that this young woman had her own car and could take her son away to who knows where at the drop of a hat. Lord only knows what my mother was imagining that we were doing. But the truth is that my girlfriend and I usually played it pretty safe. The real danger in my life started when I split up with her. Since we were teenagers, we broke up dramatically. I demanded she let me out of the car, even though we were driving down Donahue Road in Latrobe, PA. I'm not going to tell you where my parents lived because they still live there, but I sent you a screen grab from Google Maps that shows the part of the road where my ex-girlfriend let me out of her car. There's nothing over there but trees and grass and miles of blacktop. I really wanted to be alone, as you can imagine. My vague plan was to sit on the grassy hill with the shrubbery, which wasn't as tall then as it looks in this picture. I basically sat down on the grass and felt bad for a while. I had felt disrespected by that young lady, but breaking up with her didn't really make me feel any better. What I wanted the most was to be treated with respect, not to be left alone on a grassy hill. I thought about this other guy at school who would probably have his chance with her next. I thought about a few different guys who would laugh at me when they found out I wasn't dating that girl any longer. I sat there feeling sorry for myself. So in the middle of this, a big old dog comes over to me, whining like he was asking for a snack or something. I actually had a half a sandwich left in my backpack, so I gave it to him. My stomach was too nauseous for me to want to eat it anyway. So while he was scarfing down my sandwich, I got my first real look at this dog. He looked very young, but he was already quite large. I'd never seen a breed like him before, and I wondered if he was either a mutt or some exotic new kind of dog. He let me pet him when he was done eating, and almost immediately became affectionate. I assumed he was somebody's pet, probably somebody rich if he was a purebred. I searched him for some kind of collar or harness or dog tags, but I found only fleas and ticks on his person. In some ways, the big dog was quite wolf-like, and yet the fur was thicker on its back than on a wolf. Like the fur was longer and shaggier, and looked tangled and matted in places. On the face, the fur was close and short, sort of like on the faces of wolves, but he had this kind of mane, or almost a mullet look, where the fur started getting longer on the back of the neck and then continuing all over the body. He was kind of a brownish color that was almost black in places. He didn't have stripes or spots. He just had dark brown fur that was browner in some spots and almost black in others. He needed a good brushing and grooming, but he was so well behaved that I wanted to bring him home with me to my parents' house. The dog had no leash, though, so I had no real way to claim him as my own way out there. I decided to invite him to walk with me, and that was a 2-hour walk in the night from where we were. I figure if he made it all the way home, then I'd tie him up in the backyard and give him a flea bath in the morning. If he ran off before we got home, then it just wasn't meant to be. So I gave him a nice friendly pat. Then I rose up to standing height, with the massive head of the big old dog coming up to my chest even then. I skipped and slipped down the hill to the side of the road, and then the dog did too. But when it reached ground level, it did something I had not been expecting. It climbed up on its hind legs and stood there bipedally right next to me. You know the way a bear can stand up like a human, sort of? The dog was behaving like that. And when he did, he was suddenly a lot taller than me. For some reason, this didn't intimidate me. Maybe I was just too dumb to understand that this was a predator who was much, much larger than I was. And I had no more sandwiches to feed it with. I think at the time, to me, this was just a big, friendly, overgrown puppy that I hoped would be my friend. I admit that at first I hoped he was a rare breed I could return to his owner for a nice reward. But he was so friendly that my hopes changed quickly in the direction of getting to keep him as my own. So this big dog standing and walking, instead of intimidating me as it would anyone with half a brain, impressed me instead. I just thought this was the coolest dog of all time. I thought about naming him, but I was less than an hour out of a painfully emotional breakup, and I didn't want to get hurt again so soon. Once I named him, that sort of meant I cared about him, and I couldn't risk doing that to myself again that soon. So I decided that he'd get a name if I ended up tying him up in my backyard and keeping him. So there I was, walking down the side of the empty highway with my new Dogman friend, not really comprehending anything that was going on, when a car suddenly came screaming down the highway toward us. That Dogman nearly flew up the hill to the side of us and out of sight. I mean, he ran and jumped and climbed at a rate of speed that was clearly superhuman and super canine. While I was calling to him to come back, the car started beeping wildly at me. It turned out it was some mutual friends of mine and my ex-girlfriend. She had told them what happened, and they had come looking for me to give me some sympathy and a lift home. I looked up to the vegetation on top of the hill, wondering if that dog was still up there, or if it was long gone. I felt sad leaving him behind, but it was hardly the saddest thing that had happened to me on that day. So I hopped in the car to get that lift home. Inside, they all asked me about the breakup, but I was more interested in talking about the big friendly dog I had left back there. Now, I had never heard of the Dogman, but when I said that this dog walked next to me upright, like a human, two of my friends gasped audibly. This was not Michigan or Wisconsin. I had not grown up with legends of werewolves or dogmen or anything like that. The only werewolves I knew about were in movies and TV shows or comic books maybe. I had never heard about real-life wolfmen. I mean, I hadn't even ever heard of Black Shuck, or even the dire wolf, for that matter. My friends were more aware of the weird side of Pennsylvania, though, and that night was the night I started learning what a truly strange place it is. Did you know that people claim to have seen giant birds flying over traffic on the highway? Did you know we have UFO reports, Bigfoot sightings, a flying dragon, and of course, my good friend, the Dogman? On that night, when they said Dogman, I thought they meant he was the only one of his kind. They seemed to be describing him as a nature spirit or a god or demon or something. I told them this was a real dog, not a vision or hallucination or whatever. It was friendly. It ate my sandwich. Did nature spirits beg for your sandwich? It was just a dog that was super large and super nice, and I would never see him again, so it didn't matter much anyway. They dropped me off at my parents' house. I said thank you, and I went upstairs to crash out. I did not dream of the girl I had broken up with that night, but I did dream about that super tall Dogman. He told me that his name was Tensquatawa, and that he was the open door. I told him my name, and he said that we had much to show each other. Then a car beeped at me, and he ran away. much the way it had happened in real life. Only I woke up at that part of the dream, and I wrote the name he told me down phonetically. Tenskwatawa. It felt like it was something I should try to remember. The dream stuck with me, and it was on my mind the next night or the night after when I suddenly got the urge to walk out into the woods behind my parents' house. I said I got the urge. I didn't say I actually did it. Those woods are dark as pitch at night, and it's not my family's property anyway. I'm not sure which of the neighbors owns that woodland, but it's one of them. So instead of running into the dark woods in the middle of the night, I went up to my bedroom on the second floor of the house, and I looked out the window onto those woods, curious if I would be able to make out anything from way up there. Well, I could see trees. There were a lot of trees, that was for sure. I was feeling crazy, wondering if the stress of the breakup was driving me bonkers. I was standing up to grab the shade and pull it down over the window when I suddenly saw the Dogman. He walked just far enough out from between two trees that I saw the outline of his upright canine form, and I saw those yellowish, whitish, glowing eyes looking back up at me. Almost as soon as he came, he was gone, but I understood now. He had followed me home. I don't fully understand yet what or who he actually is. I do know that when I meet up with him in the neighbor's woods, he shows me and teaches me things that I might never have learned on my own. What I mean is, he wordlessly shows me things which I know he does not want me to share with you. We have had no more direct communication since that dream, in which he told me his name, but still he shows me things, and I learn lessons from what he shares. I'll be straight with you, some of his lessons get a little Donnie Darko for my tastes. When I'm angry at someone, the Dogman will show up in one of my dreams, doing something terrible to that person. I'm deeply afraid of holding a grudge against anyone as a result. That Dogman, he knows who I'm angry at, and then he becomes angry at them as well. So I need to forgive my enemies. I don't want to drive Tenskwatawa to violence, thinking he's doing something on my behalf. There are things he has shown me, both with my waking eyes and in dreams, which I could never share with a single other person. There are dangers he's exposed to me, which I could never even begin to describe with words. My parents can't know about any of this. They would do something drastic, like send me away to college or maybe even to military school or some nonsense like that. I know they would be well-meaning, but I can't let them separate me and my Dogman mentor and ally. I don't know how long I can keep it this way, but at least for now, my parents don't know that Dogman is my friend. I'd like to thank Ed Nepomuceno with my heart and mouth and braino. He's our executive producer for the win, and you know his name's Edwin. Please join us in thanking Ed Nepomuceno for making this episode possible. In exchange for his kind donations, we share with Edwin our secret uncensored Sunday stories. Dogman stories far too wild to ever tell on this channel. Plus, Edwin gains access to our over 24 hours of archived secret uncensored Dogman stories. International TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman will be along at the very end of the show to bring you all the deets of how you too can get cool perks while helping our channel stay online. But now let's jump into our final story of the day, which we call My Sister Got Too Close to the Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have a story about the Dogman that deeply and negatively affected my family way back in the 20th century. I saw the creature multiple times myself. I saw it as a puppy, and I saw it as an adult. But after my sister Maggie disappeared, none of us ever saw that upright walking canine ever again. I used to live in Wisconsin with my mother, father, and sister who wasn't really named Maggie. Both of my parents have passed on since then, believing their daughter was no longer among the living. I suppose now they know the truth either way. I'm the only remaining member of my family, but I can't really know if I'm the last living one. I first encountered this particular dogman in 1980, the same time my sister did. We were playing with some friends over at Cathedral Pines. Technically, Maggie was supposed to be watching me and my friends because she was 18 and we were 11 and 12, but I remember her spending the day playing alone with this really big brown and black puppy. I mean to say it looked and acted like a puppy, but it was already the size of an adult mid-sized dog. For instance, if that puppy were a beagle, it would already be an adult. The rest of us saw the puppy first because it came out of the woods to bark and growl at us younger kids. Then Maggie came over and pointed out that the oversized pup was wagging its tail while it barked at us. She explained that meant it was actually friendly, and then Maggie picked the big puppy up. It licked her all over her face, and she seemed to have proven her point. But when she held the young dog out for us to pet, it snapped at our fingers and made one of my friends cry. No matter what Maggie was trying to tell us, that dog only liked her and none of the rest of us. So we played our little kid games alone, and Maggie kept that dog occupied and away from the rest of us. About a half year later, we went back to that park, again with Maggie to act as our guardian. Once again, that dog ran out toward us, but this time it ran directly to Maggie, jumping up on her excitedly. This time when he did, he was pretty much as tall as Maggie herself, maybe even a little taller. I was stunned to be seeing this happen, but then I noticed that Maggie was not surprised at all. It was almost as though she expected to see the dog there. I began to think the situation through. Maggie had been missing from our home more than usual over the prior few months, but we all assumed she either had a new boyfriend or maybe a cocaine habit or something, and we really didn't think too much about it. I mean, it was 1980, but it could also have been possible that she might have been coming over here to Cathedral Pines State Natural Area and hanging out with her dogman friend. Actually, I guess he wasn't a man yet, so maybe at that point he was a dog teen or something. The next time I saw him was only about 3 months later, but it seemed he might have hit his true adult height by then. I mean, when I saw the formerly cute puppy for the third time, I screamed, and I started blacking out. My body just didn't want to be there once the by then 12-foot tall or taller monster thing crashed out of the woods and ran over, on 2 legs mind you, to my sister Maggie, who virtually disappeared under thick, massive, fur-covered canine appendages. He was hugging her, and I mean impossibly huge mongrel of some sort, was hugging my sister as though he were some kind of alternative human being. I plopped my butt on the grass and started breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth. It was a simplified form of meditation that I actually learned from my science teacher, and it kept me from completely blacking out. I had never noticed the dog walking on its hind legs that way before, so I was more than a little surprised at the incredible size that dog had grown to. Maggie told me afterward that he had always stood up and walked around since he was a pup. I guess I just never paid that much attention to the creature before. I made sure to stay out of its way so that I didn't get bitten. But once it became the truly giant size that this one had become, it was hard to notice anything other than that dog. You know, we never called it a dogman or a werewolf. We had seen it first as a dog, and as it became larger and larger, we still remembered it being a puppy. If it used to be a puppy, then it must now be a dog. I don't think I made the comparison to the legends of the Wisconsin werewolf until long after it was too late and Maggie was gone. Even though I was slow on the uptake in even noticing that this must have been a dogman that my sister was interacting with, I knew early on that she was getting herself into trouble. It was an upsetting feeling to figure out and get filled in by her. that she had been practically leading a double life, going to those same woods on her own and spending time playing with what she had to have known was a wild animal. That was not someone's pet puppy dog. It lived in the natural area. It clearly fed itself via hunting. This was not a safe playpen pal. This was a man-eating predator. I remember taking Maggie aside to try to get her to talk to our parents or our pastor or a guidance counselor or someone who might be able to help her out, at least more than I could. At first she got angry at me, taking offense to my implication that she needed help. But I really meant it. I was genuinely scared for her, and she was my sister. I didn't want to see her get hurt, and I thought she was making some mysteriously dangerous conclusions. I was only 14 at that point, I think, but I got her attention, and she seriously considered what I was talking to her about. Finally, she begged me to not tell our parents about it. That wasn't the answer I was hoping to get from her, but I agreed to keep quiet about her giant feral canine friend, who now walked up on his hind legs half the time. Maggie told me that the dog was still really mostly a dog, but it would stand up when it needed to. When she was around, he stood up like a human, and Maggie thought that meant he was just trying to be polite. He was trying to act like her, so that she would appreciate having him around. That was an age for Maggie to be socializing more. She was 18 or 19. That was why we didn't worry when we didn't see her around much. We thought she was out making friends and meeting people. But it turned out that all that time, she had been becoming increasingly isolated, neglecting her friends and family in favor of what I now understand had to have been a dogman. On the day when my sister disappeared, none of us noticed. The next morning we noticed, though. My mother called all of Maggie's friends that she knew of, but they all told similar stories. Maggie had been avoiding seeing anyone lately. She had missed out on parties and birthdays, and none of her friends really had any recent information about her at all. I knew that I had promised Maggie that I wouldn't reveal her secret, but I didn't think she ever foresaw anything like this happening. I decided to go talk to my parents and spill the beans on what I knew. I told them I thought Maggie was with this big dog, a dog that walked like a man, who we had met in Cathedral Pines. I told them that this giant dog was her only friend, and my father erupted. "Can't you see how upset your mother is? Don't you even care that your sister is missing?" Of course I cared. Why else would I be telling them all of this? My father dragged me to my room, shouting at me the entire way, as my mother sobbed loudly. I got locked in my room with no dinner for daring to tell them the truth about the dogman. Well, my input was no longer welcome in the family. I had become an only child, and the black sheep of the family, all in the exact same moment. Maggie disappeared in late 1980, early 1981, and that was the last anyone's seen of her. There's never been anything else found of her at all, so we don't know if she's still alive or not. The general presumption is that she is not, and we had services for her in 1987 or 88, if I'm remembering. Still, I sometimes wonder, did she run away with that immense beast? Could she still be with us somewhere, out there, in some forest somewhere? No matter what the true answer to that is, I can only state one thing for certain. My sister got way too close to the dogman. She's smooth and powerful, living jazz. Our executive producer, Mary Shabazz. Please join us in thanking today's executive producer, Mary Shabazz, for making this episode possible. Mary is one of our top-tier channel members, and she gets all our perks, including our weekly Sunday Uncensored Dogman story, as well as our over 25 hours of archived secret uncensored Dogman stories as well. Now here is international TV spokesmongrel Henry Lee Dogman to fill in the rest of the deets. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.